so.
Or did I?
You can leave it in there.
Well, I prefer to have it in my...
Yeah, you just have to keep it close.
Yeah. Du yolo yolo e olo yolo yolo e ongo. Du yolo 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 e ongo. Om sa solo cha olu yo lo yo lo e ongo ta vi mail me kya lo le yo ko alve naikele no ching alan yolo e ongo gaban are gaban ching alan. So this is the yoik of Tromsø Island, the little island where I live now. I live and work there at the University of Tromsø, and this yoik has a poem saying that Tromsø Island, the jewel of the north, when time was winter, she was so well dressed in snow white. No wonder that the auroras were yoiking her so intensively when time was summer. The rainbow was her jewel. No wonder that the polar ocean was caressing her so gently. And the people, the generous people, Tromsø Island, the jewel of the north. I always have my city and my island with me when I'm traveling. So we are going to address a question here. And it is that what kind of steps should be on the path of coexistence between nation states and the indigenous peoples? How should those steps be that are on such a path? And this will be a tale about fairness. Once upon a time, there was this happy nation state. As most other states, this state wanted to be a civilized one, wanted to enjoy the flower of civilization, to be to have rule of law, meaning that there were values like transparency, predictability, stability, and so on, and that these values were manifested through legal norms and such things, and that the state should be a democratic one, that it was a majority rule, but had some space for other ones as well, and that the state should be an enlightened one that had this kind of literacy, both to read and write texts, literacy regarding history, and literacy regarding structures, understanding structures. And that the state was run by values like decency, civility, justice, and temperance. And the urge of such a state was to be that to be civilized was important. That little state kept a little mirror on the wall, and every morning the state went to the mirror. Little mirror on the wall, who is the most civilized nation state in the world? You, my dear, the mirror answered. And the days were full of joy and happiness. And the future seemed so wonderful. Every day the state asked the mirror, every day was wonderful. But one day, the mirror said, you are pretty civilized, but I have been doing research. And had it not been for your treatment of the indigenous peoples, you would be the most civilized state. And who on earth were these indigenous peoples? Were we talking about the beautiful Maoris? Were we talking about the smiling Aborigines? Were we talking about the powwowing Indians? Were we talking about the reindeer racing Nenets? Were we talking about the elegant Maasai? Or the flute-playing Aymaras? Or the joyful Torayans? Or the happy Laplanders? They are everywhere, all over the globe. And there are 370 million of them. And they have been, the characterization of indigenous peoples is one historical one, that they have been living on the territory before the state came and established itself there. So this is the first of the 4 criteria. The second of these 4 criteria is that they are distinct from the other people of the states. The third criterion is that they experience themselves as marginalized in the state, and they identify themselves as people different from the people from the states. So confronted with that, what on earth should the once happy state do? So there were some steps that needed to be taken. The state needed to find a path. Should the nation state grab the riches that the territories already offered and use the people already situated there as resources as well? The state could simply enslave the indigenous peoples and grab their land from them. Like the Spaniards did with the Indians in the 15th century when they found silver in Bolivia. Or like the Swedes enslaved the Samis to transport when they found silver in Nasafjell in 1632. No, the state couldn't do such a thing. So the next question then came, should they die hard? The state could simply hunt and kill groups of indigenous peoples as if they were animals, like they did in 1833-8 in Myall Creek in Australia, or like they did on all these black dots on the Australian map. Or like they did in Bear River in the USA in 1863, and a bunch of other places. No, the state couldn't take that step. So the next step then would be, should the state capture and forcefully remove the indigenous peoples from their territories? The state could set up relocation programs and move indigenous peoples from their territories, like it was done in the US in the beginning of the 1830s, when nearly 125,000 Native Americans were forced from millions of acres of land in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, and Florida in this Trail of Tears project. Or like the Swedes did when they forcefully moved the southern Samis in 1720, and even stated that project in their legislation. No, that couldn't be a civilized state's way to do. So we need to try to find another step. Should the state make leaders of the indigenous peoples simply disappear? The state could simply capture those individuals who raised their voice and started to come up with troublesome questions, like they do in India, in Darjeeling, currently in 2009. Or, no, that a state couldn't do that. So we need to try another step. Should the state criminalize, just criminalize the presence of the indigenous peoples? Just say that you get punishment if you are here in our way, like they did in Australia. Well, that wouldn't be very civilized, that either. So we need to try out another step. Should the state populate the areas where the indigenous people live, that they could stimulate members of their own population to become settlers? Like the Norwegian government program to put settlements in Tromsø, or like the Bangladeshi government is doing right now as we speak in Chittagong Hill tracts. No, that couldn't be, that would be too hard. So we need to try another step. Should the state undermine their livelihood so that they couldn't be there anymore? And that could be done, that the animals or fish stock they rely on could be systematically decimated. Like this pile of bone project, that is known from here, where the explicit goal was to get control over the Indians. Or the activity could be regulated and the criteria to take part could be designed so that members of the indigenous people were to be excluded. Like the Sami fishermen, it was a regulation that was connected to the measurement of the fishery boats, and that accidentally applied only to coastal Sami fishermen. So they were not excluded as coastal Sami fishermen, but as owners of two short boats. Or one could design variations of Hunger Games, where the indigenous people had no other choices but to compete between themselves. Like the arrangement that the Norwegian Supreme Court went for in the Joseph Ante Sara case, cited in 2017, last year, where the plot was that there are allegedly too much reindeer, and if the community itself, if the members of the community do not agree to reduce their reindeer herd, then the smallest ones are kicked out, as happened to this young man. His sister made this art piece that is that was displayed when the court case was going on. No, that wouldn't be a good step to do. So the state could then attack the religion of these people, because to control the religion, then you control their conceptual universe. So like the shamans were, in our traditional religion, were burned in Vardø in northern Norway, and that happened at the late 1700s and lasted for quite a time, even if the art of burning witches had stopped long ago in the rest of Europe. So this is from that monument. Well, that wouldn't be a good way. The state could prohibit the language, because then one could perhaps jam up their communication and get them to get control over them. Like the Nordic countries did with the Sami languages, with an explicit and aggressive policy ending in Norway in 1957. And it was followed by a pretty tepid attitude to restore. That's not, you know, I'm born in 1958, and I stand here for you after flying over a big water. So this ended 1 year before I was born. Or should the state capture the children of the indigenous peoples? They could capture them and bring them to boarding schools, like is pretty famous in Canada, or I'm myself a boarding school child. I was. We also had the boarding school policy in Norway, so I left my home at the age of 12, and I never returned home again. I became a guest. So there were a lot of things that I can't do properly, for example, to light up a fire or such things that you learn from a certain age, and when you are absent, then you don't get that. Or the state could, to take children away, it's too hard, but one could just expose them for some racism. Which is a thing that happens. We have had open re-discussions in the Nordic countries. We never thought that they would come back, but they have re-emerged. Or the state could be more peaceful, could say to the indigenous peoples that it's okay that you are here, but until more worthy interests come, then you have to get lost here. So you tolerate their presence, but as soon as better interests enter the scene, then indigenous peoples have to give way without any compensation. That was an arrangement that the Norwegian Supreme Court decided in the Marshfield case, cited in 1956. And that decision was made regardless of the fact that the Norwegian Supreme Court, the Norwegian Constitution guarantees ownership for people, but these Samis, they did not get their ownership. So they, one could say that at least they could have just some money for that they have to get lost. That we can say to them, get lost, but here you have some compensation that we decide. That was how the Norwegian Supreme Court decided in the Altevatn case in 1968, 12 years after the Marshfield case. So they got at least economical compensation to vanish, disappear. Or the state could be even better, because all these things happened that we have been looking at, these steps. They have been happening without the right to be informed, that you are informed. And the right to be informed is that you have a right to get to know what plans exists about you and your world. So at least somebody comes and tells you. And that is the current situation with the Swedish Sami parliament. They have just a right to be informed, as do the Sami parliament in Finland. They have just a right to be informed. So that means that they are beings with 2 ears but no mouth. they have to learn to listen. Well, the state could be even a little bit more humane, that they could give the right to be consulted for the indigenous peoples. And the right to be consulted is that you get the information and you get to speak. And give your comments on what you think about the plans. But at the end of the day, the nation state decide how things shall be. But at least you have got the right to speak. That is the current situation of the Sami parliament in Norway. The Norwegian Sami Act gives them the right to be consulted, and there is also an agreement. And that is the situation in Canada after the Haida Nation versus government of British Columbia in 2004. The experiences in Sami, we have two experiences. It's the process with the Nordic Sami Convention, and there the Samis were it was a kind of asymmetric power relation in those consultation processes. In practice, the Sami delegations were sent to the corridor when the decisions were made, and they were made about the Nordic, how the Nordic Sami world shall be configured legally in the future. And in the Tana case, it was about the fishery of salmon on the river that divides the Norwegian and Finnish territory, and which is populated by the Samis there. Imagine if the state is even more sort of radical, that they say that not only shall you get the right to be consulted, but we will grant you with veto power. Veto power is the right to either accept or decline a packet that somebody else have packed for you. And there we come to this, to the question whether the indigenous peoples should have the right to say no to these packages. We haven't seen those packages in practice, but for example, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, they have this standard with the free and informed consent that they try to work for. But that is not seen yet. Or we could we think even further steps that the state could take? That should the indigenous people even be granted the right to come up with initiatives themselves, so that they also get to take part, to make the package, so that they don't get this pre-packed package to either accept or deny. So that the nation states and the indigenous people could form the future on equal footing. Both could come up with initiatives And there would be no hegemonies, no asymmetries of power. Like we haven't seen yet. But the common project is that we should get the flower of civilization to flourish, to get that flower to be alive and vibrant and beautiful. Thank you so much for the attention. I hope I didn't break this.
Andy, would you have time? Would you like to take a few questions?
Yeah, sure. If you have questions or comments or reflections or inspirations.
Oh, yes. Keep using the microphone.
Yes.
Does anyone?
Yeah, if you have questions, comments, reflections, inspirations, then you're most welcome to come.
I have one question.
Yeah?
Lunchtime, I saw you went to have lunch at the place where I came out, and then I took a picture of you because of your hat. I wanted to find out, like, what your outfit, you know, is it from the Samis? Is does it have something to do with your, I'm sorry, because I came in the middle, so maybe you mentioned that and I didn't know. I just wanted to find out, like, what is it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, this is a traditional Sami clothing. It's called gakti. And gakti is very practical because it's a bag at the same time. So we have our things here. And here, back here, the way the tail is made is called farada. And farada is the signature that you have. So it was no accident that this is also a tail, this presentation. And so these gaktis have been used in the mountains, and they're very practical, and we also find them very aesthetic and inspirational. My hat is one of the remaining pieces of clothing from the pre-Christian religion. And the hat tells the four directions: north, south, east, and west. And I have been working with the hat for a while, because I think that we are sort of, as a legal professional, I feel the collective guilt that we the legal professionals carry now, because we are the ones who should guarantee things, so that if contracts are not upheld, or if human rights are violated, and so on. So we should be there. And then we are in the crisis where the nature is so polluted, and we haven't been able to guard that. So I go with the hat almost all the time, and that is a short little reminder that it's so important that we listen to the laws of the nature. And I'm expressing that with my clothing. And you see my shoes here. They are also made so that we live in a world where there can be much snow. So you have to have this kind of belt around, so that that you won't be wet. So that was about this.
I have a question. You're a professor at the Arctic University in Norway. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how that university was constituted, and also how, in the Faculty of Law, and what does that mean in terms of how law is taught in that university? I mean, first of all, are the students, who are the students? And that's one question. But also, how is law taught within this university?
You know, we have a big party at the university now. 50 years since the university was established. And it was established because we had a huge problem with depopulation from the northern Norway to Oslo. So they wanted, it was a political project to get a universities that could stabilize that. It started as more or less a medical education, and then became, after a short while, became a more regular university with both humanities and social sciences. And after a while, the law faculty came in. I took my law degree in Oslo, so the first ones I graduated back in 1987, and the first ones from the Faculty of Law in Tromsø graduated in 1989. So I was working as a lawyer, and then I was asked to come and start teaching there. I came there in 1992, and since then we have almost 1,000 students. And what is particular with our law faculty is that we are the only law faculty that has a mandatory course in Sami law where every student shall be educated on the legal issues regarding Sami culture. And we also have like 6-7 in the Sami staff now. I was pretty alone back in the days when I started there, but then we have new people coming in, so it looks vibrant and prosperous now.
I mean, in terms of Sami faculty?
Yeah, in terms of that, we have both Sami faculty, we have Sami students there, and the Norwegian students, they get to know about the Sami issues through the mandatory course in Sami law. So we are pretty happy with that faculty at the time.
Just wanted to, I travel a lot, and I saw the movie from the director Colonel on Sami Blood. I don't know if you saw that movie, which it was the first time, and I won't tell you my age, but it's the first time that I actually heard about the Sami culture. And of course, you know much more about, what happened in Australia and what happened in US, but it's the first time that actually I was, I've seen, in Norway and also the Sami culture. So I don't think that there's much being said. If it wasn't for that movie, I would have maybe never known about the Sami culture, and it was quite an eye opener, and which is why I stayed, for the lecture actually.
Yeah, Kernel has made a beautiful movie, and it is so good that it's the Southern Sami story that is told, and with such a good touch. So it's a very, very good piece of art, and a masterpiece when it comes to how you can inform people through art. So I guess that that movie will get in the curriculum, and it's also very interesting because it has, for the for pretty educated people, it has some comments on details. So it's a movie that gives food for everyone, and that is a very good quality for any expression, that if it can talk to different people and tell about different things and tell different things, to not contradicting things, but to be a kind of concert of information, and that is so. I will also recommend to see Sami Blood. It's a beautiful movie.
Hi. First, I want to say that I really enjoyed the form of your presentation. Thank you. I do not know much about Samis yet, but I'm really interested in knowing more about it. But it seems that their presence of Samis, their presence is covering a really large-scale territory, from like all Scandinavian countries all up to East Russia. Am I right?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, could you tell us more about more specific issues about those communities in all those different places, which are really like several ones?
Yes, the Sami space is that we are not. We are a people of diversity, so we have like 9 different languages, and we live on big territories because we have been living on ice and snow. So it means that it's territories where food can be scarce. Traditionally, or we have a saying in Sami that when things are bad in Russia, they are good in either Norway, Finland, or Sweden. When things are good in Finland, they are then bad in Russia and Sweden and Norway. So it means, what that tells is that we have also been part of 4 nation states' history, and that can fluctuate in different ways. But we, being the same people, we then experience these fluctuations and compare them very much more than the general population, say, in each of these countries have been doing. So the issues that are important in the Sami world are, of course, land rights, as is familiar here, and also cultural rights. The situation has been historically, you know, Russia being an empire was much more used to have different populations than the Nordic countries. So it meant before the communistic revolution, when the Tsar was in Russia, then the situation was much better for the Russian Sami than for the Swedish, Norwegian, and Finnish Sami. After the communistic revolution, the times were very hard for the Russian Sami, and the Scandinavian Sami, or the Samis living in the Nordic countries, it was pretty rough for them as well. We had the sort of first Sami organization was established in 1956, and that means that people prior to that time had broken their backs, so they were not even organizing themselves. So since 1956, the Nordic Samis have been organized. After that communism fell, then it was a very nice but short time in Russia for the Russian Samis. But currently the situation has become very hard for the Russian Samis again, because their regime changed the policy. So now I mentioned the Nordic Sami Convention that is in process, because Russia doesn't want to take part of that. So we are a kind of indigenous people who have world politics very, very close to our bodies, so to speak. Where the relationship between the superpowers directly affect whether we can go and visit each other. Now we have had a good situation for the Nordic Samis. I mentioned the Sami Parliament, that there is a Sami Parliament in Norway, in Finland, and in Sweden. There is no such thing in Russia. And I mentioned that the Norwegian Sami Parliament has a little bit more power than the Swedish and the Finnish Sami Parliament. Now we are in a situation where big and strong interests want to have minerals and resources that happen to be underneath our homes. And some want to catch the wind that is in our homes. So we are all of a sudden like this, to be a small person and be in a bar where there is a big strong guy going to the bar and you are in the way. So there are a lot of big strong guys who want to have our minerals now, and we are just situated there, and it's our homes, and we say that don't come and take these minerals, because then you will end up polluting our homes as well. So we have a kind of setback in the situation. But then there are a lot of our young people who are much stronger now than ever before. For example, Joar Nangu here, his art is hanging here, and we have a lot of young, strong Sami artists who are pretty manifest, and we have a bunch of lawyers that are taking education in our faculty, and we have also other professionals coming up. So, yes, times are getting a little bit harder, but we are also getting a little bit stronger than we have been before. So we are not pessimistic. We know that we have this saying that it's a it's a lot of work to be a Sami, but we love to be a Sami in this world.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I have a question about literacy. You mentioned literacy, and I was wondering if you could maybe say a little bit about. I understand that the written language was introduced to Sami in its early colonizing days, and I wanted to know what the impact of that has been over time in terms of Sami being able to develop a written culture, which is distinct from Inuit, who haven't had a written culture that's developed. And so I wondered if you could just speak a little bit to that, and possibly how that has impacted relations between the nation state and the indigenous peoples of the Sami region.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting and very deep question. Because one can have different views on the impact of literacy, text literacy, that you are able to read and write. Like in my family, I guess I'm the first one who can read and write. So my father could maybe formally read and write, and my grandfather didn't read and write. And I think that my father was a much better storyteller than I am. And I have heard that my grandfather was a much better storyteller than my father was. So I'm very, I don't know whether it's a progress or not to learn to read and write. I mean, one of the things is that if we see what people read, what our people read, it's much easier to propagandize against people who are literate in reading and writing. So it also implies that a society becomes more vulnerable. But our people got the reading and writing from the church, and the purpose was that they should be able to read the Bible and to be Christianized. And also the governmental purpose was that then you could give instructions. If they managed to read the instructions, then you could write instructions for them. So in that way, it was a tool of instructing the people. Has it been good for our cultures? Yeah, nothing is entirely bad, but our authors started to appear in the 1970s, and yes, it is developed a very interesting art in writing from several of our artists. I saw the text that Nils Aslak Valkeapää has written. It was in the entrance here. So yes, that has been a very important tool, but I'm not so sure yet whether we are the people in the relationship with the government that get the most out of literacy. My current project, what I'm writing on now, is how you mediate legal information, that legislation can be looked up as a medium, and so can court decisions be looked up. But also oral traditions can be a kind of medium that you mediate through. And that was also one of the reasons why this presentation was modeled much like a story from our traditions. I like to see if it's possible to use the old ways in new spaces. And but compared to the Inuits, because one other thing that often happens with indigenous peoples, it has happened with the Sami people like 4 times in our history. There is Professor A comes to visit and visits us, and then introduces a writing language, and everybody learns that language. And then comes Professor B and introduces a new writing language, and then everybody learns that. And then comes Professor C and introduces the new orthography and grammar and so on. And then people get tired, because alphabetization is a beautiful thing, that people get alphabetized, that they get literacy and so on. But when that happens, that the writing you have learned is not valid anymore, then that is analphabetization. And that has happened many times. And I used to smile all alone, that why don't that happen to English? That somebody comes and says that, well, forget what you used to write yesterday, because today we are learning something, a new way to write. This operation, this analphabetization operation, that you can only do with small indigenous peoples who are not strong enough as the English-speaking population would be, that they would raise their voices and say that no, but we are used to this and that. So that this question about literacy, it's a very, very intriguing and deep question. And I wish I could have said that, well, literacy was a salvation for our people. And maybe it was, and maybe it wasn't. Sorry for the very long answer here.
Thank you very much.
Last question for me. Okay, if you look in the history, there is the youth in Germany has had to carry a lot of weight, you know, based on what happened after World War II. There was a lot of, like, you know, making them carry the weight of their past. And up to now, you know, this is something which is very stigmatizing for them, but also has helped to actually speak about things and, you know, support, you know, a new way of thinking and forwardness between minorities, which were at the time the Jewish people, and then, you know, the thinking of Germany. Then it's also happening with Australia, where, you know, now there's a lot of the youth that in Australia has been, you know, stigmatized as well, to carry the problems of all the indigenous people in Australia. So my question was, you know, how is it happening also in Norway? And how maybe could you use, you know, somehow the consciousness of the youth to bring them to help to make sure that things are getting better for the population of the Samis overall?
This is a very good question, and maybe the most important question in the future of civilization, and that is, how shall our societies be able to deal with collective responsibility? That if, because you have the situation that there is a lot of technology around us, this and that and this and that. Our generation did not invent that. Some other generations did. So, and we are having the gains of what they have been doing for us. But each of these things have shadows. And then the big question for our civilization is, how shall we do with these shadows? Shall we say that we only want to see the good things that the historical processes have given to us? We don't want to see the shadows. Or shall we say that, well, we inherited this world for good and for bad. And I think that the German youth and Germany is a very interesting space in that respect, because they have maybe been the first one in the history to really try to deal practically with historical responsibility, to organize collective guilt that they have inherited. Their generation hasn't been doing that, but they have carried that guilt and they have sort of administered that. And in that respect, because this will come in many shapes in the future. This will come as a question, how the majority population and the indigenous people, how shall they organize their future together? And it will come between generations, that the young generations and the old generations, and how did you pollute so much? So this is an aspect of humanity that I think will require a lot of creativity, a lot of deep thinking, a lot of wisdom, a lot of love, but it also will have a lot of joy in it. And I have seen some glimpses of what you are asking about. I have seen by teaching the Norwegian law students about Sami law. And there comes some pieces of painful information about what Norway has been doing to the Sami people. And I have been doing that for some 20 years now. And I see something that is very healthy, because it's painful to hear bad things about your nation state. But that needs to be organized somehow, also bad information. So that is a very interesting challenge that I think the generations to come, maybe, I hope they will become much wiser than our generations have been on that. But that is maybe the challenge of the family of humanity, to stick together and be good to each other.
Here I have maybe a more specific question, but I think it's kind of really. So I was wondering how do Scandinavian and Russian museums and other archival institutions deal with Sami production and book, you know, like in general, and if those issues are similar to the ones we're, for example, facing here with the production of First Nation, like in general, cultural production and artwork and all this, because well, most of the time, this approach of the, for example, museums, it's saying it's showing a much deeper, you know, like approach and sensibility to the culture in question. So yeah, I was wondering, like, from more in this archival point of view, and je sais pas comment on dit la pérennité de cette émission-là. You know, lasting. Yeah, in this kind of view.
Yes, we have a Sami museum body in each of the countries. So again, the situation, there are 4 different situations. The situation in Russia, the situation in Finland, the situation in Sweden, and the situation in Norway. And the topics are sort of the same. One is the issue of repatriation, whether things that have been taken from Sami communities, brought to big museums, whether they should be brought back. That question applies to also to human remains. Graves were opened, people were transported, and now the question is whether these people shall be transported back. It also applies to objects, and that has both practical and substantial questions. The practical questions are often that when these objects are brought, then they are poisoned with strong poisons so that they should be conserved. So it's not an easy thing to bring them back, because then you also will bring the poison back. So you have a practical issue. Then you have a substantial issue which varies from object to object. For example, the shamanistic drums. There are very few remaining, because most of them were burnt by the priests, but some are preserved. And they have a lot of tension to them, partly because some Christian Samis do not want them back, and so there are conflicting perceptions in the population on certain objects. So it's a situation that needs to be organized and structured. And then there can be issues like we have one burning issue, and it's the yoiks that are collected, and then they are locked down in the basement of one particular museum, Tromsø Museum. Sadly, it's in our family, because it's in the Norwegian Arctic University. So they have locked all the yoiks, and they have some problems with the yoiks. One is that they were collected maybe not in good ways. The second is that there might be some copyright issues, and there might be somebody who has been yoiking indiscreet things about some persons. So there can be issues. So the solution that Tromsø Museum has had is that to keep the genie in the bottle, and not facing these problems with the collection that was questionable, not facing the question whether copyright, is it the composer, is it the person who is yoiked, or is it the village that has sort of confirmed that yoik, that should be the copyright holders. Complicated legal questions. Let's keep the genie in the bottle. The consequence is that a lot of the yoikers who are literate yoikers, who know the tradition, they die. So the context dies, and the text remains, the yoiks remain, and one day they will be open, and then you will have a big problem how to interpret. What was the aesthetics? What's particular with these poems that they are using there? So if I'm belonging to an oral culture where things are not written, so it's a complicated area. This area of with museums and access to your culture, repatriation, and how to solve it. So it's a big question. Okay, it has been wonderful to
Thank you.
be your guest.